Well, my name is Jake. Thank you so much for that, Keith. I really appreciate it. And we're back in a Genesis sermon series. So if your first time was the last 2 weeks, you had no idea we were in a Genesis sermon series. But really, we're saying this is the origin story for our faith. For the Jewish tradition, for the Christian tradition, this is where it all began. And in a good book or a good movie, you learn so much about the direction of the plot based on where it begins, right? And so in the beginning, we've walked through 3 chapters of Genesis so far, and I'll just quickly mention, we have these little packets. If you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what we're talking about, these are kind of just a helpful guide for you to navigate Genesis, and they're over at our Welcome Center. But in the beginning, we see 2 things. We see that God has a desire for our lives, and sin has a desire for our lives. God has a desire for our lives, but also sin is a desire for our lives. So the first 2 chapters, God makes everything, and he makes it good, right? Every longing you have in your heart to see things set right, or to see the Mariners win a World Series, all these things that we hope for, right? Yeah, that should be funny. That's never going to happen until Jesus comes back. All these things we want to be set right are right in Genesis 1 and 2. And God makes humans, and he calls us good. And what he does is he gives humans a job. He says, rule the world like I would, or in biblical language, be my image to the world. God has a desire for our lives, but sin also has a desire for our lives. And in Genesis 3, the humans are faced with a choice. A snake comes into the garden, Satan enters the garden and tempts them to doubt God's goodness and says, you'd actually be better off if you took matters into your own hands. God's wisdom, why don't you pursue your wisdom? And so they take this fruit, they eat of the fruit, and in doing so, they break the one command of the garden. And they end up being driven out of the garden, both as an act of judgment, but also as an act of mercy. Because what could be worse than a corrupted human who could live forever? That's not good news. But it ends with hope. In Genesis 3:15, God's issuing out kind of these judgments to the man and to the woman, and also to the serpent. And he says this to the serpent. He says, I will put enmity, super deep, biological seated hatred between you, which is the serpent, and the woman, between the offspring of the serpent and hers. The offspring of the woman is going to crush his head, and he will strike the heel. And so we get is this promise that one day an offspring of the woman is going to come, and he's going to vanquish death and evil and everything wrong with the world in an act of goodness and judgment, and it's going to be great. And he'll be injured in the process. That's what we celebrated at Easter. This is the first promise, right? Jesus does this on the cross. Fabulous time. But here's the caveat. If someone said to you, your offspring is going to play in the NBA, would you think that I meant your kid? Would you think that I meant your grandkid? Would you think that I meant 5,000 years later? So why this matters is the first story out of Genesis, these words are fresh. These just happened. And Eve and Adam likely have a hope that one of their kids is going to be the one to do this. What kind of expectation do you think that would put in your life? What kind of expectation do you think that would put in your life? And what you'll see is right out of the garden, the major problem is sibling rivalry. This is actually a huge major theme in the book of Genesis. After Genesis 13, almost every major problem happens because of sibling rivalry. It's a huge deal, right? Let's see how this plays itself out in our text today. We'll start in Genesis 4:1. Adam made love to his wife Eve. She became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I brought forth a man. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, Abel kept the flocks, Cain worked the soil. Good so far. In the course of time, pause right there. We don't know what this in the course of the time means. This could be 15 years. This could be 50 years. Like imagine the most dramatic relationship you have in your life. Summarize it in the course of time, okay? Let's keep going. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering. Fat portions. Ooh, this is good. This is the filet mignon. He's been smoking this on the Traeger, like the brisket, for 20 hours, right? And he brings the firstborn of his flock. We just talked about no details and how that's important. Here we have a really big detail. And it's really important for us to get this, right? You'll see why this matters in the next text right here. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So that word offering, super religious word. And if you're not a religious person, I don't really know what we're talking about. The Hebrew also works as gift, right? To give an offering is to give a gift. So it's giving a gift to God. And typically, the quality of the gift refers to the quality of my love. It usually shows that. So I want you to think Mother's Day is coming up. I got to get a card for my wife. So is my wife going to love more if I'm frantically, oh my gosh, I work here on Sunday and I got to go get a card, so I'm driving home and I got to get gas in the car and pick up the dinner, and I run into the gas station, I grab the first card, and then give it to her? Is that going to be preferred to me sitting down a week before and just keeping a list of all the things that she does that I love? And I write these affirmations, I write these things I love about her, this beautiful handwritten note, and I hand it to her. Which one is she going to prefer? This is correct. That's also a good idea for Mother's Day. Don't get a gas station card, right? It's not that Abel's gift cost more, it's that it showed his love. That's why his offering is accepted and Cain's is turned away. It shows the quality of their affection, right? But you can see sibling rivalries percolating in this story, can't you? Right? And I want to pause in the story here for a minute to talk more about sibling rivalry, because this is a big deal for both you and me, and for all of humans. And I'm not talking, last night my son picked his nose and flicked a booger at his sister, or I don't leave the toilet seat down. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that the people you and we're supposed to protect and love and cherish, they're a threat. They're a threat. And so here's my proposal to you guys about what sibling rivalry is. Sibling rivalry is born out of the fear that there isn't enough for both of us. We have this fear that there's not enough for both you and for me. And it's important to acknowledge the fear that there isn't enough. A lot of parents do a wonderful job. There is enough resources. There is enough affection. There is enough attention for all the kids. But there's a fear within us that our parents don't have enough for us, so we compete with each other, right? This is a big deal, even in the broader culture. I brought some examples that are so helpful to me. William and Harry. I knew nothing about this before I started researching this sermon, so forgive me if I get details wrong. But essentially, William is heir to the throne of England. Harry is the spare. And this has caused so much drama and tension. And you married this person. Well, you said this about my wife. And they fought as kids to the point where the next in line has left the royal family. These are grown men. These are some of the most important people by position in the world. And yet sibling rivalry is causing division. Maybe the best animated movie of all time. So good. Lion King, right? Mufasa is the good, righteous, true king of Pride Rock. And Scar's his brother. And Scar does not believe that there's enough for the both of them. It's always, always, always Mufasa. So he takes matters into his own hands, and he kills his brother. And he becomes the king, right? And here's the deal, guys. This is true for me, too. I am the middle child of 3 boys. And so my mom's right here. If you see my mom in the lobby, say thank you for keeping us alive, because that's a Herculean effort. I had so much sibling. I could tell you story after story of us competing for our parents' attention and affection when there was enough, right? So this is a real thing for all of us. But there's more to the story, because sibling rivalry is not just that. It's that there is sin within us. There is sin within us, and that sin has a desire for my life. Let's see how Cain responds to God not accepting his offering. Cain, he was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door, and it desires to have you, and you must rule it. It's crouching at the door." Pop quiz time. How many of you guys think the first time that the word sin is used in the Bible is in the Garden of Eden at the tree? Like, do humans sin and rebel against God? Anybody? You can tell I'm asking a trap question. Thank you. I thought that was the case. I thought that was true until I read this. And what's fascinating is sin is not introduced as an action. Sin is introduced as a character. Sin is not introduced into the story as an action, like don't sin. Sin is introduced as a character. And this character has a desire for my life. Sin has a desire for my life, right? But God gives Cain a chance to respond. He says, hey, I have enough for both of you. If you do what is right, you will be accepted. It's not that Abel wins and Cain loses. There aren't winners and losers in this thing. I have enough for both of you. And all you have to do is show me that you love me, right? That is what happens. So God's desire for your life is that you would believe that the Father has enough for you. That you would believe that the Father has enough love for you and the person who's in your mind right now, as we've been talking about Cain and Abel. And sin's desire for your life is, in the words in the New Testament, to kill and to destroy. Who does Cain listen to? Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out into the field. They work out there. Not weird. While they were out in the field, Cain rose up and attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Why is this word here? Why is that word there? That's really interesting. It's a detail that's included. I like to think that it's a really cool analogy, right? Sin is crouching at the door, and who rises up? Cain rises up. So Cain partners with sin to kill his brother, right? Adam and Eve were hoping that Cain would come and stomp on the head of the serpent to kill evil itself, but Cain partners with evil to take the life of his brother. Then the Lord said to Cain, where's your brother Abel? I don't know, he said. Am I my brother's keeper? Are you your brother's keeper? And am I my brother's keeper? What do we do with this? What do we do with the war in our hearts? What do I do about the fact that the people closest to me are actually the ones that I'm the most prone to be jealous of and to harm and to take advantage of? What do I do about that? I think about this story in my own life. I went to a VBS when I was a kid, and this is great, man. I told you I have two brothers, and at this VBS, one of the kids was picking on my brothers the whole time. I was like, this isn't great, this isn't right. And the last day of VBS, so the story goes, this kid has my brother in a headlock. So what do? I think this is the only fight I ever got in. I walk up to the kid, I go, you leave my brother alone, and pop, punch him right in the nose. Great way to solve your problems. We do not endorse violence at our VBS. Our leaders are very well trained, and we solve our problem with words. Right? So I stood up for my brother. I will be my brother's keeper. And that same summer, I'm watching Power Rangers, my brother's skateboarding. I was born in the 90s, in case you couldn't tell. So he's out there skateboarding, and I hear my mom come flying down the stairs. Jake, your brother's crashed his skateboard. He's broken his two front teeth, split open his face, and he's probably got a concussion. He's in bad shape. This is not good. And so I'm sitting there on the couch, and all I can think is, good. I wish something worse would happen to him. I didn't think you'd laugh at that. I wish something worse would happen to my brother. He deserves it. He's a jerk. That good for nothing, that nobody. So in the same summer where I defend my brother, I can't protect him from my own heart. I can't protect him from what is within me. The best way I've heard this put is actually from an old Cherokee Indian story. It's fantastic. It goes like this. There's a man and his son, and the man is talking about the evil war within him, the fight for the struggle between good and evil, and he puts it this way. I have a fight going on in me, the old man said. It's taking place between two wolves. One is evil. He's anger, envy, greed, arrogance, superiority, and ego. The other embodies goodness. He's peace, love, humility, kindness, generosity, truth, and compassion, and faith. Both wolves are fighting to the death. The same fight is going on inside you. and every other person too. Son took a moment to think about this. At last, he looked up at his father and said, "Which wolf will win?" The old Cherokee gave a simple reply, "The one you feed." So, Grace Church, I ask you, which desire are you feeding? We have sin's desire within us, and we have God's desire within us. Which one am I feeding? Cain chooses very poorly, and yet God responds with mercy. God responds with mercy to Cain. The Lord God said, "Listen, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land. I'll be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." How does God respond? The Lord said to him, "Not so. Not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. This story is a disaster. This is a disaster. And sometimes when you read these stories in the Bible, you think, "Oh, it's crazy that happened." This has happened to real-life people. This might have happened to someone you know. This might have happened to you. This is real life, right? And so what do we do? If I were in this situation as a parent, I have no idea what justice would look like. I have absolutely no idea what right and wrong would be in this situation. It's way too complicated. But God responds with mercy. Cain failed to protect Abel, and he took the life of his brother. And so what does God do? He steps in, and he protects the life of Cain. And at first when I read this, I got mad. This isn't right. I don't think that's justice, that the innocent would be killed by the wicked. And how is the wicked repaid? With protection? I don't know about this. Doesn't seem right to me, right? But then I take a step back, and I think about the state of my own heart. And I think about how I'm prone to jealousy and anger. And I think about how I don't trust that there's enough. I think about how I take matters into my own hands. I think about these things, and I think, I'm actually really glad that God responds to me with mercy. I'm very thankful for that. And this is where the story turns to Jesus, right? Just like Abel, Jesus was innocent. But beyond Abel, he was perfect. He was perfectly aligned with God's desire for his life. He never once gave in to sin's desire for his life. We so much talk about, yes, Jesus is fully God and fully man. And sometimes we don't understand the fact that Jesus was tempted in every single way that you and I have ever been tempted. He was prone to sibling rivalry. He was prone to jealousy. He was prone to these things, and yet he chose to believe that the Father had enough. And because he believed that the Father had enough, he would do incredible things. He would live a perfect life, right? And he didn't just tell us that the Father had enough. He showed us that the Father had enough. He would die on a cross so that you and I could have restored relationship with the Father, because he so firmly believed that the Father had enough for you, and for you, and for you, and for me. The Father has enough. 1 John 3 says, "See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we would be called children of God." And my friends, you and I are children of God, and he loves us, and that's good. So my question for us right now, how would the way you view others change if you understood that the Father has enough love for everyone? And when I say that, I have a person in mind, and I'm giving the talk, right? Who is the person in your life who you need to view with the eyes of the Father? And who in your life do you need to trust that the Father has enough for you and for that person? Would you behave differently at work? Would you climb the ladder a little less fiercely? Would you treat your spouse with more kindness? Would you raise your kids differently? If you believed that the Father had enough for everyone, how would your life be differently? We often talk about the fact that Jesus died for our sins. And that's great, right? We say, hey, there was a cost that needed to be paid, and so Jesus paid the cost. He died the death that I deserved so that I could come into the Father's presence. That's great. That's true. But that's half the battle. When we say Jesus died for our sins, we also mean that Jesus died so that we could overcome sin's desire for our lives. He actually desires that we would live differently. He actually desires that we would trust that the Father has enough. He desires that we would live out God's desire for our lives. But he doesn't just desire that. He gives us some really practical know-hows, which I'm very thankful for, right? He gives us antidote to the sin within us. We talked about the sin within Cain. Let's look at the sin in our own lives. So in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is giving his Sermon on the Mount. It's fantastic. And he talks about murder. He says, hey, you've heard it said to the people long ago, you shall not murder. And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. All of us can say, yeah, that's a fair law. Cool, great. But I tell you, anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. That wasn't part of the agreement, Jesus. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, you empty head, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Oh, I don't know about that, Jesus. I felt good about, don't murder. I've done, successfully done that. Don't say you fool. Some of us like to use other four-letter words when we talk about people that we don't like, right? And this is you fool. And he's saying this is a big deal. What Jesus is saying is that murder is not the issue. It's a symptom of the disease. And there's something far deeper at play when you murder someone than just murder. There's a biblical scholar named Jonathan Pennington who just puts this fantastically. He says this, notice Jesus does not abolish the seventh commandment, don't murder. Rather, he shows the deepest sense and consummate reality of the commandment. That is, its fulfillment. He gets to the heart of the matter by saying the real issue underneath murder is not the act itself, and it is a wrong and it is a devastating act, but the heart and the inner disposition of the actor. Not committing the physical act of murder, it's good and right. But it is not the true litmus test of one's alignment with God's will and coming kingdom. For that, one must examine their own attitudes and language about other people, which are just as important. And he goes on. For Jesus, a life that aligns with the will of God is that my actions and my thoughts towards other people are generous. They are so generous that when I'm tempted to think I'm better than them, that my opinion about their worth actually matters, God is the one whose existence establishes the worth of other humans because they are image of God. And relationships in the kingdom are to mirror that reality, which means every single human being that I come in contact with is of ultimate worth and sacred dignity, especially the person that I'm thinking of is of ultimate worth and sacred dignity. You can tell whether or not someone really believes that with what they are tempted to do when they are frustrated with someone else's behavior. Has anyone here ever been frustrated with someone else's behavior? This isn't all play, right? In other words, we can most clearly tell if we are aligning with God's desire for our lives in how we think about and how we treat other people. And this is a live issue for me. This isn't something that I get up here and I've got it all figured out. I was talking with Keith about my sermon last week, and he said, man, this is heavy, hard stuff. So he encouraged me, why don't you write a list of the people in your life that you're tempted to hate? Why don't you make a list of that? And that's not a fun list to make, is it? And then, with that list in mind, ask this question. What would it look like for me to live out God's desire rather than sin's desire in a difficult relationship? Sin's desire is to destroy and to kill and to divide. And God's desire is for love and compassion and boundaries, right? And there's an important caveat to be made here. There's abusive relationships. There's boundaries that honor God that need to be put in place Forgiveness is an entire sermon series in and of itself. And I'm not asking you to solve all those problems, but I am asking you to meditate on that question and ask the Spirit of Jesus who lives within you, what would it look like for me to live out God's desire in a difficult relationship? It could be your literal sibling, but it also could be your spouse, your kids, your coworkers, your roommate, a great friend. The list can go on. What would it look like for me to live out God's desire in this relationship? Because here's the deal. We cannot be in right relationship with God if we are not in right relationship with other people. This is what Jesus will continue to say in Matthew. Therefore, if you are offering, there's that word again, your gift at the altar, and you remember your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. Set it down. First, go and be reconciled to them. They didn't have smartphones. They couldn't just phone call. They had to go find them. Then, come and offer your gift. 1 John puts it even more strongly. He says, whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or sister, is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister, whom they have seen, cannot love God, whom they have not seen. There's lots of texts that are really difficult to interpret in the Bible. Genesis it's complicated. It's written to, ancient context, this kind of stuff. We wrestle through it and we discern the will and all that kind of stuff. This is a text I'm very comfortable with all of us taking it at face value. I'm very comfortable. Hey, this doesn't really need any interpretation to me. Do you love the people closest to you? And if not, what do we do with this, right? God's hope is that by believing the Father has enough for us, and that is how we overcome sin's desire for us, is by believing in the will of the Father, that he will create a new vision and a new version of humanity. It's not one marked by sibling rivalry, but one marked by generous love for one another. Right? Sin's desire is to tear families apart, and God's desire is actually to create a new family. In fact, the earliest descriptions we have of Christians is that they would call each other what? Brother and sister. God created a new family, one where we would not be threatened by the people closest to us, but where we would seek their good, where we would step in and protect them and honor them and treat them with dignity, where we would not view them as a threat, but we would actually lay down our lives for them. This is the vision of humanity that Jesus has, right? God is enough for you, and he has enough for me, and he had enough for Cain, and he had enough for Abel. Kirk Franklin puts it this way: if God is our Father, that makes us family. How can you love God and not love me? And how could you not love Kirk Franklin? If you don't know who Kirk Franklin is, you will get your gospel education by listening to him. But Jesus doesn't end his time on earth with his disciples with like a vision casting. The last thing he does with his disciples isn't to give them like a 12-step action plan for here's how you're going to plant the Christian church. He doesn't even give them a creed. He doesn't give them a statement of faith. What he does when he says, hey, you're going to remember me by this, is he gives them a meal. He gives them a meal. Every one of us eats a meal every day, right? And hopefully, we eat those meals with the people that we love. And so what Jesus is doing in this moment where he institutes communion is he is actually giving us a new family dinner table. And he's giving us a chance to look each other in the eyes and practice peace with one another. We talk about communion, we often talk about communion is about having right relationship with God, and that is true. And yet, the word communion must be done in community. Jesus did not give this sacrament, this bread and this cup to his disciples in a vacuum and say, hey, can you guys each go find your own little corner of the room and do this and we'll come back. He actually gave it to them together. And I believe that's a very deliberate choice because God desires that we would become a family. And the best way I know of to make a friend is to have him over to my house for dinner and to make him something good to eat. So the way we're going to take communion today is a little different. Typically, we stand up, we walk, we grab the bread and the cup, and then we take it in our own time. I would love for each of you, if you come forward, to grab the bread, grab the cup, and come sit back down, because there is so much power in us taking this together as a communal act. As I said earlier, we're all a part of God's family. And so he's the head of the household. And so if you would call Jesus Lord of your life, this table is open to you, my friend, and we would love to have you be a part of it. In fact, our table is so open that our communion is gluten-free. So for those of you with dietary restrictions, you are welcome to the table as well. Let me pray for us. Father, you love us. You have enough for every person in this room. And so much of the pain and the division and hatred in the world stems from the fact that I don't believe that you have enough. Stems from the fact that I believe that I have to take matters into my own hands. That I must scheme, and I must eliminate threats in order to have enough. And yet, Jesus, you showed us with your body and blood that was broken and shed on a cross, that you yourself would be enough for us. Father, would you bless our time in communion today, and would you be with us? Amen.